Welcome to the SSI Orbit podcast, a forum for conversations that explore the ever-growing ecosystems of self-sovereign identity. And I'm your host, Mathieu Glaude. Today I talk with Sandra Ro, CEO of the Global Blockchain Business Council, referred to as the GBBC, which is a Swiss nonprofit focused on education, advocacy, and partnership across over 40 countries. Sandra was named to the Innovate Finance Women in FinTech 2016 Power List and holds directorships on several industry boards, as well as advising and investing in emerging tech startups across blockchain, robotics, digital assets, IoT, and VR. Now, Sandra has so much expertise in financial markets, and prior to getting into crypto in 2011, yes, 2011, she led an M&A FX and interest rates derivatives advisory group at Morgan Stanley London, and also had some experience working at Deutsche Bank London as an FX structurer. So thank you for joining us today. In this conversation, we start off by talking about Sandra's background in traditional financial markets, and how she got into crypto, and just talking a little bit about how banks interacted with crypto then in 2011 versus today in 2021, and how we think they're going to interact with crypto tomorrow. We talk about the excitement and movement around DAOs. We talk about the beauty of open source and Web3. We talk about everything digital payments, central bank digital currencies, stablecoins, DeFi, also the interaction of these together with digital ID. We discuss big societal trends like the separation of money from state and the separation of identity possibly from state. We talk about why technology innovation lags and why the costs keep rising in sectors where there's a lot of government regulation and intervention, such as healthcare, education, and real estate. We talk about an important component in the Web3 stack, the decentralized storage component. And we finish off the conversation by talking a little bit about what's happening in the Global Blockchain Business Council, specifically in their digital ID working group. Now, thank you again for joining us today, and without any further ado, here's my conversation with Sandra Ro. Enjoy. So Sandra, when I look back at when I got into the whole crypto blockchain space, it was in 2016, and I just got so excited about it. So much so that I did a career change to just jump right into it. And we're about 5 years later from 2016 now. And when I look back then, you just say, oh my God, things were immature. It was so exciting, but it's crazy to see the progress and evolution that has happened in the past 5 years. I think it's just the amount of people that have come in, the communities that have grown, the investor, and like everything has just gone in that direction of growth. And for yourself, you got into the space. I'm looking back 5 years. When I got into the space, you were already in the space for 5 years yourself. I would love to hear just from you what kind of brought you into the whole crypto Web3 space, what you were doing before, what pulled you in, and kind of what was the scene at that point?
Well, first of all, Mathieu, thank you for having me. It's a great chance to walk down memory lane a little bit, crypto memory lane, I guess. So I was sitting in London and I was working in banking as a derivatives special situation structure, basically a very fancy way of saying I did M&A deals and did all the hedging for M&A deals. And the financial crisis had happened. Simply that. I had put myself on a banking track and thought I would be a banker until, moving up the hierarchy, and the financial crisis happened. I was in the eye of the storm on a number of different levels, saw a lot of the fragility of global financial systems, financial services. And it was a very scary time. And having come out of that and hearing about this new technology, at the time it was Bitcoin, I didn't think much of it, but a lot of the traders in London in particular, just because I was there, really spent a lot of time actually looking at this tech, and we didn't know, Bitcoin price, I can't even remember, maybe it was like a couple of dollars, maybe it was $20, it was definitely under 100. And to think that it was going to one day be where it is today, that was the furthest thing, I think, from a lot of people's minds. I think the forefront of what people really cared about back then was, is this technology for real? Could you really have a network that is P2P, transfers value with basically no intermediary and solves the double spend problem? that was a big deal, to think that there could be no intermediaries. And I immediately went to thinking about my own markets, which were the foreign exchange or FX markets, people call them, and thinking, wow, does that make FX markets and the current like paradigm of all these different intermediaries just go away? Like, does this completely make a paradigm shift? And that's so where a lot of us started. And so I bought Bitcoin. We met in like dodgy pubs in London. It was really, like you said, it was immature. Like, wow, it was very immature back in 2011, 12, 13, where we were just all just trying to figure out, does this work? And it does. What happens to this thing and what can it be used for? And what are the applications? And that's really where the journey began. And you're right, today, when you look at the number of people, the number of applications, it's mind blowing, really, truly, how global all of this is. And now we're talking multi-trillions.
It's funny when you talk about the sketchy pub meetups. That was kind of the same thing when I got into the space, but it was just so exciting because it was just like I had never seen that much excitement around a group of people, and week over week there was more and more people showing up. And I guess the difference at the time when I had gotten into it, we were Ethereum had launched, and at that point we were kind of nearing the whole ICO fund. So a lot of people were getting interested in the whole thing, just seeing that there was a lot of money to be made or raised around projects. But those were crazy times. But I actually miss that sometimes. Just the immaturity around the whole space. It was just everything just looked so promising. And not that it doesn't today, but it was kind of a cool time.
Well, I think also the early adopters in the space, once they understood the potential power of this technology and the various applications beyond the initial use case, I think really drew the intellectual curiosity, which of course still exists today. But I think you're right. When we think about the speculative nature of, a new technology, and let's face it, the opportunity, like you said, to make a lot of money, it does attract also, unfortunately, the bad elements. And I think the crypto universe, I guess we'll talk about the state of today, really is at a crossroads in my mind, where we're seeing again the hallmarks of a lot of unfortunately unsavory actors and malintentioned folks to scam other people, and that's not good for the industry. However, we're also seeing maturity, and we're also seeing development in other categories beyond financial services, which we could certainly talk about. But if I go back one more step in terms of the journey that I took, I ended up at CME Group running the R&D area for FX. And underneath that, we tucked in cryptocurrencies just because, well, we could quietly start researching because we were research and development. And what I think was really unique about that is we were one of the first big corporations, big institutions to really deep dive into not only Bitcoin, but the nature of digitizing value and what that looks like from a trading perspective, as well as beyond that. And I think that for us was really, truly, we felt like pioneers because we were pioneers within that firm. And it was pretty great. We drew people from technology, from legal, from product development, from compliance. We found all kinds of folks inside of the firm that were interested in this thing called cryptocurrencies. And we learned a lot by sharing. And I think that's the one thing I want to pull out from our journey here over the last decade is the collaborative nature of this entire ecosystem and technology. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. This global grassroots, like helping each other and sharing information, I hope doesn't go away, even with the increased competition. And yeah, people want to make money. I totally get that. For-profit institutions, they have value. But I hope we don't ever lose that collaborative nature of this tech.
Yeah, it definitely is wonderful. And that was like clearly one of the first things going from meetups to going into the technology and into different communities in the space. That is so true. And that's what really personally drew me over the past couple of years into the decentralized identity space as well, where you really have this similar ethos and the similar mentality where people realize that for this stuff to succeed, you need to be able to collaborate. And so it's so interesting when you see various consulting firms or different technology solution providers, companies that would traditionally be competing against each other, rather than doing that, they're collaborating, because they do realize that if they do collaborate, it increases the chances of more widespread adoption of these technologies, which at the end of the day grows the pie, which at the end of the day, satisfies the incentives that everyone is looking for. I'll also say, I guess, just as a side note, I think people tend to talk about greed in the space a lot. I think greed definitely is a part of human nature to begin with, to some extent, right? And I think a lot of the promising, evolutions that we're seeing, and we can't discount things from happening when you're doing a lot of tests and trying out new things, but it allows you to just learn from mistakes or learn from trajectories that you don't necessarily want to cross again, and put the right controls in place. But at the end of the day, the stuff is here to stay.
Yeah, I mean, look, I am a capitalist, so I don't think for-profit driven motives are wrong, but I do, and I am concerned about a capitalist-only model, meaning everyone loses and I have to win mentality. The zero-sum game mentality really needs, I think, a rethink. And I think the generations that are coming up, and even current today, I think there are question marks around that, because why can't a for-profit institution of any kind, of any size, also think about its impact on society, whether it's climate change or whether it's immediate impact to the community, and whether it's actually helping or actually harming. Those should be part of any company's mission. And I disagree with the ethos that others have to lose or everyone else has to lose in order for me to win. I just think that mentality is really something this technology actually pushes up against, right? And pushes back in many ways.
It is interesting to see, at least in corporate governance, to your point, there are a lot of positives where you see corporations now forming, and they have different structures that actually allow for-profit corporations to have these societal missions or goals kind of written into the governance of the company, to not lose that as growth occurs. Another area I'm jumping a little deeper into, where I was planning to touch this later in the conversation, but what are you seeing around the distributed autonomous organizations? So these DAOs, because when I think about DAOs, this is where I think about, hey, these are phenomenal vehicles for like-minded people that it could be any goal really, but if you have societal goals in mind, you could really, really leverage these tools to advance whatever you're doing through a DAO.
Yeah. Do you remember the first DAO that happened back in, what was it, 2016 or 17? I actually put some money in to go into the DAO, and I was so excited. But it was like any first experiment, right? You should expect that things will go wrong, and they did. But it was still a fascinating learning experience of just people getting together from all over the world who don't know each other, and crowdfunding. What was it at the time, 60 or $70 million? I forget, but it just seems so long ago. But today, the DAO of this version, I think, is getting some form of legitimacy in the AKA, Wyoming. The state of Wyoming has passed a law actually recognizing DAOs. I still think they're at its infancy. It's really around governance and how a group of people decide that they're going to organize themselves with no hierarchy, at least not in the traditional sense of like a CEO, for example. But I do think there will be challenges. I think we've already seen that play out in some of the experiments that we've seen even in organizations that are not a DAO, like in DeFi. Sometimes the voting mechanism is difficult. If you allow every single person to have an equal vote, that sounds really great in principle, but then when you get to practice, it can or cannot fall apart depending on obviously the topic or the set of goals of that organization. So I think we're going to see an entire, like, almost renaissance of different governance models, experimentation. I think this is going to be years in the making. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and it's funny how things go in and out, I guess, from I always make a difference between kind of the mainstream in, like Bitcoin went into the mainstream like a few years ago. NFTs kind of just went into the mainstream just recently, but it's funny seeing kind of like the crypto mainstream, and it definitely seems like DAOs are, like you said, going through a renaissance in the crypto mainstream right now. And I guess the cool thing about it is they are experiments, but just by like the nature of open source and almost being able to leverage different protocols or different pieces of code, it allows for the innovation to go much quicker. That's one of the things that I think in a broader kind of range of things, like we're seeing open source just growing overall, and the largest companies in the world are recognizing that, like Microsoft purchasing GitHub, and a lot of these companies over the past like decade or so moving more from kind of garden walls to more open approach. But there is a beauty behind the open source in the crypto world where you could literally just play Legos, take pieces from all over the place and run your experiments much quicker than it would have cost maybe if things were closed in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head regarding what's so wonderful about the blockchain community and this entire set of ecosystems. It's just, you can go in, it's not only open source, but it's open access for the most part, right? And I'm talking about mainly the public chains. And the thought of that, like, even, I don't know, I guess if you said that to somebody like 20 years ago, they probably thought you were crazy. The thought that like all these different platforms would be completely free and open access. It's just not something I think that the first version of software really thought about. It was almost the opposite. And so I think for a lot of corporations, and I'm talking about mainstream, it's a difficult mindset. Some get it, but I think from a culture standpoint and a mindset standpoint, it's still very difficult, which is why you don't see a lot of these corporations fully embracing 100%. I think there are very few exceptions. Like, when you look at EY's baseline and Nightfall, like, to me, wow, like, that's a corporation. That is a company. And yet they're pushing, thanks to Paul Brody, completely open source, open access.
We have some good friends at the EY offices in Toronto and in Dallas as well, actually. And it's just been phenomenal and exciting to see them take this approach towards their blockchain strategy and pushing this stuff out to their client base and really investing in open privacy protocols has been phenomenal. The contributions they've made to the community. That's what I love about, like, back to DAOs. That's what I love about the DAOs. I think it's just, it's a different way of coordinating people together. You're not necessarily constrained by physical boundaries anymore and a corporate structure. It's really ground up, community driven. And that's why I find so cool. I think a lot of the companies in the crypto space to date have been kind of just regular companies, right? It's like you incorporate somewhere, you have your regular company and you're investing in building products that are using this. But the cool thing with DAOs, and there's some cool examples from just seeing Shapeshift decentralize or announce that last week, seeing the Syndicate raise a bunch of money from early users. You're starting to see just a change in the way people think about coordination and corporate structure.
Yes, absolutely. But I will make one caveat there, which I think is something for all of us to look out for, is I completely agree with you. The power of bringing lots of different people together. You can raise awesome amounts of capital now in a non-traditional form. And you can also get lots of people doing very cool things within a common mission or a set of goals to achieve much faster than you could ever do on your own or with a small group in a hierarchy. But I think where the real test will come, because there's still not solidified legal status around DAOs globally, when things go wrong, when huge amounts of funds or, I don't know, a smart contract's written incorrectly and there's a bug and tons of people lose money. I'm just giving hypothetical. I'm not saying it's happening, but where do you go for recourse? And as someone who is, a former banker, also market infrastructure, nobody ever thanks you when you run market infrastructure for running it day to day and it functions. They will pile on top of you and scream at you when it goes wrong and it doesn't work or there's an outage. And I guess that's part of human nature as well. And so for me, the success of any organization and any system, doesn't matter what type it is when it's under stress and it's under a risk type scenario where something goes wrong. How is it dealt with? Who's accountable? And how does it get fixed? And I think if DAOs can figure that out, with or without the legal system, that'll be very interesting to watch out for.
I guess you don't know what you don't know, right? Until something goes wrong, or you don't know in something new like this. Yeah.
It's the saying that, like, when times are good and everyone's making money, it's kind of like when the stock market goes up, right? Like everyone's like high-fiving, it's all great. No problems. And then, the minute there's a downturn or something significant happens, and I think there have been pockets of this in the crypto space as well. Like, what do people do? They lose money, they turn around, they sue someone, or they want to hold someone accountable. And it's not, those kind of core human traits do not really change no matter what technology we're talking about. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is when things go wrong in DAOs, which they will, who will or what will be in place to help navigate the disputes, find the resolutions and allow for that network or, organization to continue, because that resiliency is key to sustainability, right? If we're going to have this stuff for the long term and they're going to be, they're going to grow and prosper, they also need to deal with, challenges and any knock-on effects of things going wrong. And I think there have been a few in the DeFi space that I think can give us a bird's eye view. For example, there have been some smart contracts, that have had issues and they've had losses in the millions now. And it's interesting to me because I think if we were talking 5 years ago, we probably would have been talking about much smaller numbers, but because the industry has grown so much, now typical losses are millions, tens of millions, and potentially even hundreds of millions, which means, it gets people's attention a lot more, and it certainly gets regulator attention much more frequently now, just simply by the fact the industry is bigger. It's no longer this, sort of side interest of just a small group of people. It's growing, it's pervasive, and it's not going away.
It's quite funny when you think about it, like a lot of these projects that would still be categorized as early in the innovation cycle or R&D. The difference between this type of R&D and R&D in the traditional world is it's not tied to monetary value in a protocol that's live and that has a lot of risk for people. So that's quite funny, right? Like you're still seeing a lot of experiments and stuff like that, but it's just the scale at which things could go wrong are just drastically larger than just inside a lab, right? Where it's just between the four walls and we're running some tests.
Oh yeah, I mean, we're talking about an unbridled global experimentation, which is like amazing and also a little bit scary at the same time.
Real scary. You mentioned earlier, like going through kind of before you got into Bitcoin, just having gone through the financial crisis, and it is funny that I guess the Genesis block on Bitcoin had a note that kind of referred to the bailouts that the banks were getting at the time. And the reason I bring that up is because I want to jump into central bank digital currencies, because I know at the GBBC, there's a lot of effort and thinking that goes into this, a lot of time spent on this. I did talk about CBDCs just recently in another podcast with James Loperfido from Tangem, who is a member of the GBBC, also as part of the digital identity working group within that organization. But I would love to hear your perspective on CBDCs. And I find it ironic to a certain extent that not the reason Bitcoin was created, but there was a reference to kind of the issues that Satoshi had with central bank power, I guess. It seems that a lot of the central bank digital currency conversations are happening within the crypto community as well. So how do you look at that whole scene and what's happening right now?
Well, first of all, shout out to James, awesome human and friend. So great that you had him on a podcast. Regarding CBDCs and stable coins and cryptocurrencies, I find it very perplexing, Mathieu, why people look at things so black and white sometimes. So there's an entire group of folks who make the argument that somehow all these things cannot coexist in the world, that they somehow, one's going to kill the other. And look, there may be within the grayness of the different functions of CBDCs and stablecoins, for example, where a CBDC comes in and maybe the thing that was pegged 1-for-1 to that original fiat currency may lose some, of its value in the ecosystem because there's now the CBDC version. I don't know. But what I think we need to get to is a place where there is more granular thinking around what is this CBDC for, what is this stable coin for, and what is this cryptocurrency for? Because I will tell you, looking at things from a macro perspective around the world, there are different needs of different people regarding the transfer of data as value, aka money moving around in the new digital infrastructure or in a digital infrastructure. And when I think about the needs of a farmer sitting in Cameroon versus, someone in distress, like in Haiti, for example, who's been cut off from, basically the internet. These are very different problems, or versus the US trying to deliver funds via, their mechanism. Some work, some don't. And the question that I have is, why are we not approaching this from a problem first perspective? And then what tools are out there, or what tools do we need to develop and products do we need to develop to get to the right solution or the best solution? And maybe it's a couple different solutions depending on the use case. And so I've been making the argument to a lot of folks that CBDCs are not inherently bad or good. Neither are crypto, neither are stable coins. The question I have always is, what's the motivation for creating these things? What problem are we solving here? And do we need to implement a new solution for that particular problem? And in some cases, yes, because there is no infrastructure to deliver cheaply micropayments, for example, especially cross-border. I think that's one of the biggest problems that's out there, is how do you deliver efficient and cheap, almost next to nothing, low cost, no cost, cross-border payments. You should be able to move 10 Canadian dollars to anyone in the world, just like email. Imagine if we got to that.
That's a very interesting perspective of it's not one solution fits all. It's never like that anyways in the real world. So it's just understanding what's the use case, what's the motivation. Like I could imagine the amount of time that people just in the US, for example, waited in distress for stimulus checks that didn't come quickly or at all because of the process that's in place. That's where something like CBDCs, would have been quite valuable. But then for other folks that have privacy use cases, or maybe don't necessarily want to have traceability, maybe it doesn't fit. So it comes down to, I guess, what problems are you trying to solve with it?
Yeah, and look, I think there are a lot of subtopics within the CBDC category, and I am absolutely on side with folks who are worried about government surveillance and programming money to basically surveil citizens. That it should not be the focus of a CBDC, at least within a democracy, right? So how do you protect that? And how do you balance between KYC AML rules and keeping, nefarious actors from manipulating CBDCs and the digital infrastructure to the more important part, which I would say is to help citizens who are in need of either these benefits or the government funds. In some ways, it works if you are properly part of the system. And let's say, for example, in the US, I'll just give the US example just because I happen to be sitting here. If you're registered and you've been filing taxes with the IRS has your contact details, and you're probably able to get any kind of like fund directly into your bank account if the IRS has that correct information. However, if you fall outside of that, and you are not registered for whatever reason, or you're just one of the many millions of people who are challenged and are not sitting there with the correct information with the IRS, then guess what? You're going to have a hard time because the US doesn't have a national digital identity solution that captures everyone. We have issues around migrant workers. We have issues around undocumented folks. We have lots of different issues, and there are tons of people who are left out of the system. Sometimes it's clerical error. Sometimes it's actually intentional. How do we help those people?
I think the combination you mentioned, there's no widespread digital identity system in the US. I think that the combination of ID and payments is a very strong idea for a lot of these things to succeed. Do you think that, I guess, because like within modern monetary framework that are kind of managed centrally by central banks, when money is created, and there's a lot of new money created recently in the US, but when it's created and distributed, it gets distributed through partners, which are kind of like commercial banks. Do you view commercial banks potentially being disrupted by kind of if you imagine a world where you have CBDCs with a strong digital identity, do a lot of the central bank, do a lot of the commercial banks' functions get disintermediated?
I think one of the things that a lot of folks conflate is that somehow central bank money is the money that's sitting in your bank account. That is not the case. There are different types of money, and then there's the wholesale market, and then there's also the retail market. And when you're talking about different types of money, like commercial banks are able to basically issue IOUs, which is, a lot of people rail against, which is the fractional banking system, because of the way the current banking system works, which is IOUs all day long, and then they basically get settled with the prevailing central bank in a batch process, right? So if you think about intraday risk, there is actually intraday risk that these banks fall apart and something goes wrong. But having said that, there are also guarantees in place to ensure financial stability, which is actually critical to all of our daily lives, at least sitting in the US. I will say that in terms of disintermediation, that might be the case for certain countries because they didn't really have a strong commercial banking system to begin with. But for the ones that have legacy banking systems that are quite strong and quite entrenched, I think it will be interesting to see how they evolve. But do they go away? In reality, I don't think so. There will always be probably some sort of commercial bank function. It is not for the central bank to take over the commercial bank function, if that makes sense.
Got it. So you have an ecosystem of all these different types of money or types of infrastructure for payments. You could have CBDCs. You could also have non-government issued stable coins or tokens that get used by different DeFi protocols and such. I'd be interested to hear from you. I think for, I don't know, the past 15 years now, we've basically seen fintech threaten a lot of market share that the banks have. I think unlike a lot of people had predicted where fintech would just eat up the banks, there's been a lot more mergers and acquisitions or partnerships between them. Although fintech has eaten up market share, but also has created new market share. How do you see DeFi interacting with fintech? Does DeFi just become fintech? Does DeFi eat away at fintech? What's your perspective on all that?
Yeah, no, I think we have a fascinating, we are living in a fascinating period of time where, not only have we or are we going through a pandemic, but we're already paradigm shifts happening because of technology. And I think one thing I just want to highlight in terms of the financial services industry, just because that's where I come from, there were already fintechs, yes, eating away at different parts of legacy existing institutions, whether it was asset management side or whether it was consumer banking or commercial banking or investment banking. Because remember, like, even though we talk about banking, they're not a monolith. There's lots of different areas of financial services, right? Kind of the last to really go, I think, will be insurance, because it's kind of the oldest stalwart. But even they're being innovated upon. And I think what has also been an interesting trend beyond the fintechs coming in is think about the big tech firms. Like, there are big tech firms that are now increasingly going into financial services. So the banks aren't just being under pressure because of technology and fintech. They're actually under pressure because of the big techs coming in and saying, hey, I'm going to offer different pieces of financial services, whether that's a digital wallet or whether that is, insurance or whatever products that typically you would only go to a bank for. So the lines are being blurred about who offers financial services, first of all. And then from a regulator standpoint, like, that gets pretty hard because yes, there are rules for banks and certain services. But if you think about it, if you take those same products and start then diffusing them across different groups like big tech, fintech, and now DeFi, it becomes much more challenging for the regulator to determine whether actually these guys are all under our purview. And it might be like one day, if Apple decides to enter into specific areas that are highly regulated and require a license, they'll have to get a banking license. Or right now with DeFi, I don't know if you saw the headlines, I think it was this morning or last night, BlockFi, which is really not DeFi, it's CeFi, but BlockFi has been handed a cease and desist by the New Jersey Attorney General for basically acting and servicing, and I guess they say they've broken securities law by offering interest-bearing products. And so these are going to be interesting challenges that we're going to see as different players come into the financial services ecosystem. I don't care whether you're DeFi or not. It's going to really be around, are you offering things and products and services that hit regulatory oversight?
It becomes interesting, or I guess difficult at times for entrepreneurs entering the space, especially in models where there's no current regulation that covers what's happening. Like, you could clearly see sometimes that, like, okay, you talk to your lawyer, but you could see you getting into a space and you could see, you know what, like there's current securities law or whatever regulation that clearly demonstrates that what I'm trying to do here breaks that. But there's a lot of gray zones, and like you described, I think we're going to see a lot more vertical SaaS companies move into financial services, because it's kind of like once you've acquired market share for a specific vertical, and once you have the recurring revenue coming from that, like, the logical next step is to move into financial services. And I think that is a big trend that you've kind of illustrated that we're going to see more and more of.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what is going to be challenging for regulators. Obviously, I'm not a regulator, so I can't say how they're planning on going about doing this. But and also in the US, it's more complex because we've got so many different regulators handling different pieces of financial services, for example. But let's go back to our like moving micropayments around frictionlessly, like email, right? In that world, think about all of our chat messaging apps. Like we should be able to move around small amounts pretty easily just by sending a message. And I think we're going to get there. Someone's going to offer that. I guess the question is, do they then automatically become a payment services provider? And if so, then they need to, in the US, get money transmitter licenses, which, by the way, means it's all 50 states that you need to go apply for money transmitter licenses as it currently stands. Pretty complicated if you're a tech company. Wow, all of a sudden you have to get all these licenses.
Yeah, not a regulator, not a lawyer, complicated space, and it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out.
The only thing we can be sure of is, I will say right now, because the lines have been blurred by amazing innovation, and let's face it, like a lot of this is really starting to be democratized across, different entrepreneurs who come up with a solution and a product and a service. They're able to offer it, especially in DeFi, where there's so much innovation going on. It's going to be very interesting to see where the regulatory roadblocks come in. And I see it this way. The first generation of DeFi innovation is going to encounter a lot of what happened in the first generation version of FinTech. They're going to be met with regulatory hurdles. There will be challenges. The industry's probably going to, have truncated growth for a while, meaning it'll have to like kind of step back and regroup. And we'll see what the regulatory landscape ends up looking like. But eventually, there'll be a huge growth spurt again once that clarity comes in. So if this is the Wild West phase, then we will have a more tempered, within regulatory guardrails phase at some point. I think we're just entering the regulatory guardrails coming in.
Switching gears a bit, I want to talk about a few industries. One being education, that I know is dear to you. One of the things I personally noticed, I haven't explored it too deeply, but I've always been interested in kind of having this conversation. And I felt like since you're so well-rounded, you would have a perspective on this. Is that in a lot of industries that are driven by technology, they're really deflationary, meaning the TV, I just bought a new house, and the TV that I'm going to buy and mount into a basement room there, this 70-inch TV, the price it cost me today, which is, I don't know, $1,000, 10 years ago would have cost me $10,000. And you have a lot of these industries that are driven by, driven a lot by the private sector and a lot in technology, R&D, innovation, where the prices go down over time. But there seems to be industries like education, like healthcare, like real estate, industries where there's a lot of government intervention. And we see the opposite happen, where my TV prices are going down year over year. The prices in healthcare, the prices in education, the prices in real estate are going up. Why is that phenomenon happening?
I am equally as concerned when compliance and regulatory and legal requirements basically eat up and cost innovation millions, if not billions of dollars of investment just to comply. That's not good for society. It's not good for anyone. So in many ways, I don't know if a DAO is a solution, but I think some sort of utility distributed network that allows for regulatory adherence at zero cost. So we're working on something right now. I can't go into too many details because the public release is not happening until a few weeks from now, but I'm working with a number of folks around the world related to the FATF travel rule implementation. So whether we like it or not, countries are going to write rules around the travel rule, and how does crypto and the community of VASPs actually figure out ways to comply without spending, in my mind, too much money? How can we do this in a way, if we're willing to accept that we have to comply, then how do we do it in a way that actually satisfies that requirement, but keeps it extremely low cost? Well, the only way to do it is if we come up with a distributed set of standards and adherence mechanisms, aka software or metrics, that allow us to prove that it has been complied with. And then regulators are hopefully able to have sight of it, and we can do it in a way that keeps all stakeholders happy. But I don't know if that's going to happen. That's a realm of reg tech. I think the community should be spending more time on, because it is beneficial to work with the regulators, not fight against them, if we want this to scale in mainstream world. That would be my suggestion, is don't let companies or a single company own the market where they offer one software product that allows the compliance, then they jack up the rates and everyone's beholden to it. Or because there's no clarity, you end up hiring lawyers, legal fees go up. No offense to lawyers, we need lawyers, but an innovator should not be spending most of their money on legal clarity, simply put.
Got it. So being able to codify rules and policies to make it more accessible, I guess, to innovators and entrepreneurs to tap into that without having to learn about everything, invest in legal resources and everything to make them do that. That makes sense.
If we get the rules of the road, let's just code it, codify it, and let it run its own network, and everyone can comply, and it could cost very little, and let everyone have access to it. If it's a US thing, if it's a EU thing, to me, that would be an ultimate distributed system that would benefit everyone in the ecosystem that's in the crypto space.
So another component of the crypto or Web3 space that I know you know quite well as well, we just talked about codifying compliance requirements, perhaps, which could leverage distributed protocols and smart contracts, and just leaving distributed audit logs and so forth, and proofs. Another piece you know very well is decentralized storage. I'd be quite interested in hearing, I think there's different ways that people, even in the crypto space today, use to store different files. Some are still centralized, some are decentralized just through, or I guess through distributed databases, but you have other ones that have incentive mechanisms built into it. And I know you're associated with Filecoin, which is one of the leaders in the decentralized storage space. How are we going to see decentralized storage grow in usage over the next few years, and why is that really critical to a lot of the use cases of Web3 really achieving what they've set out to achieve?
Well, thank you, Matthew, for bringing it up, because for some reason, I feel like we don't talk about this enough, and everyone just thinks that, oh, well, I'm storing my data in the cloud. That's good enough. We're done. No, we're not done, because if we think about the world of data, ultimately we're throwing up more and more data. I don't know what the latest count is, but I'm sure someone can look it up. But we are data producers. Like, everyone's producing more and more data, and where's that data going to go? And I know for different reasons, some people still want to have their own server and keep it, to themselves. But in a world where we're sharing more and more data, and how do we share that securely? Networks like Filecoin, and full disclosure, I'm on the advisory board of Filecoin Foundation. I've been a long time advocate and supporter of the project, and I'm just really glad that they're proliferating and supporting so many other projects around the world to start utilizing decentralized storage. Here's the thing. Data is going to be not only important regarding your own personal data, but it's going to be important regarding value and money. And there are different hierarchies of data. Some data is kind of just silly and just out there, no big deal. So maybe you don't need to secure it with, Uber security. But then there's very sensitive data. Do you really want your healthcare records getting out there? Do you really want, certain really sensitive financial information getting out there about yourself? So we need also different solutions for the different types of data that we are increasingly creating. And I've spoken to, behind closed doors, a Senate committee, Judiciary Committee, actually, around this topic, which is the different nature and the classifications around the data that we have. Some may still be fine to sit on servers and cloud, but there are other distributed solutions out there like Filecoin, but there are others as well that we need to be encouraging the development of and actually putting resources to not only take on the quantity of data we need stored around the world, but also better security measures for not having honeypots of data that get attacked and hacked all the time. I feel like, we see these hack attacks and we're like, oh yeah, another hacking, another whatever, cybersecurity breach. It's a big deal. And in the US, it's becoming obviously a very big deal because it's now critical infrastructure that's being attacked. And so I know this is a long-winded way of me saying this, but I actually believe the decentralized storage solutions that are out there may also be a key to helping us solve the honeypots of data being stored issue, which then attract the hacking.
I think it's a similar comment to the one you made with the CBDCs about kind of it's not going to be one that wins all. It's not a zero-sum game. You need to have a mix of stuff for different use cases. It's sounding the same as you're talking through this. A lot of the use cases that we're working on in the decentralized identity space, we've seen the architecture of that shift over the past few years when, we had done a proof of concept for a government a few years ago. And at the time it was kind of like, because it's decentralized identity, we want to use a blockchain and we want to store stuff on a blockchain. Then it's like, okay, well, it's maybe not cost efficient to do that, number one. Number two, well, there's actually massive privacy concerns with doing something like that. So it evolves a little bit. And then now you see, if you want to be in control and have ownership of your own data, it doesn't necessarily need to be stored in a central place. And a blockchain is, to some extent, a certain place. It's distributed nodes, but you're storing it centrally on a ledger. So, okay, let's use kind of edge database mechanisms to store personal data and have them cryptographically verifiable on there. But then you start saying, well, okay, now I have a need for backup and recovery services if this is going to be user friendly. And that's where you maybe start pulling up stuff like Filecoin or decentralized storage to store kind of your verifiable credentials or whatever you need to store if you need to recover it if you lose your phone, for example. So all that to say, I could see it being quite interesting, just having some sort of, I don't even know what it would look like, but some sort of matrix that helps you classify where data should go and where data should not go. In some quadrant or classification, that would be kind of a cool thing, just to show, there's a reason why you would use cloud and you should use it for this. There's a reason why you should use edge databases and it's for this. There's a reason why you should use distributed storage protocols and it's for this.
Yeah, I actually wonder if someone's working on that, because if they're not, we should really get somebody to map that out. That's a great idea, Mathieu, actually. Well, and I'm not saying it's going to be perfect.
No, well, you guys, it's something to iterate on, and it sounds like the GBBC has different working groups that could collaborate together on stuff. So that may be a good place for it. But as we finish here, sorry, Sandra.
Yeah, how clever you've given us. I said, how clever of you. You've given us more homework to do. Excellent.
Yeah, your members are going to be happy. But yeah, so just as we close in mentioning the GBBC here, just for the audience here that maybe has not heard of the GBBC, would you be able to give just a bit of an overview of what the goals and missions of the organization are and some of the interesting things that are being worked on? And for a lot of the audience here, there is a lot of work happening within the digital ID working group in the GBBC as well, which is worth checking out. So would love to hear just a little bit more about the organization, Sandra.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for that. The Global Blockchain Business Council, the GBBC, is legally speaking a nonprofit association incorporated in Geneva, Switzerland. And we have subsidiaries and offices around the world, including London, Washington, DC, and New York. But think of us as more a federated model and network of builders and leaders around the world, including over 270 institutional members, from Fortune 100s all the way down to startups you've never heard of, from really tiny islands around the world to 130 ambassadors who represent us on the ground across 76 jurisdictions and disciplines. So we have a vast global network of, as I said, builders, leaders, dreamers, but we have one common purpose, which is we believe that blockchain and digital assets and cryptocurrencies are a multi-trillion-dollar industry in the making, and there are many, many layers to this. And so we are critically focused on education, advocacy, and partnership. And we want to bring folks together who want to solve real-world problems, who want to help each other, and to create opportunities around the world. I hope we don't end up with 5 huge companies that control everything. I actually hope we create networks upon networks of different groups of people, whether they are DAOs or corporations or whatever organization makeup in between, who are able to tackle some of the biggest, global problems that we have in the world. And so we care very much about SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, alongside the growing of this business and industry. We do not have to forsake caring about society and community because we're busy making money. We can do both. And frankly, that's really the makeup of our membership. I call us, our folks have bright minds, but they also have good hearts. And they're all working on different aspects of some very big problems that are out there in the world.
Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. To stay up to speed with future episodes, or to catch up on ones you may have missed, make sure to check out the SSI Orbit podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you subscribe. If you have any questions, comments, or wish to see someone in particular on a future episode, you can find me by searching Mathieu Glaude on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get back to you. See you all next time.